when it comes to this Antony Blinken's visit to China, and in which he was forcing Chinese not to help Russia in the conflict in Ukraine, and even he said that the United States would sanction China. In your opinion, what was the outcome of this trip, of this visit to China?
Well, let me just hypothesize here for a minute. I was in China in 2000, 2001, 2002. We were doing policy planning talks with the Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, and others. But the ones with the Chinese struck me. In addition, on the side, we were doing HIV/AIDS talks because China had asked for help. They had a real problem with polluted blood that was all over China, and it was spreading HIV/AIDS really, really fast. So we helped them. Good days then. What I would have said back to Antony Blinken, were I Wang Yi or Xi Jinping or anybody, Shui Tenkai, anybody in the Chinese panoply of diplomats and others with whom he might have been talking, I would have said, how about if you quit helping Israel? And this is what the Chinese have learned to do now. As they began to learn with us after we invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, they began to say, don't start your talks with human rights. You're the biggest human rights abuser in the world. So let's get beyond that. Oh, and don't start your talks with Taiwan because we have an agreement over Taiwan. Okay, let's save time. I would have been even more forceful this time if Blinken were talking to me, especially Blinken, because he's such a smarmy individual. And the Chinese don't like smarmy. I would have looked back at him and I would have said exactly what I just repeated. Okay, how about you get out of helping Israel? We'll stop helping Russia and Ukraine if you stop helping Israel with genocide in Gaza. That's how the Chinese deal with us now.
Sometimes when I think of these kind of behaviors, these type of actions that are happening, these type of policies that are happening right now, on one side, you help Taiwan against China. On the other side, you ask China not to help Russia. It seems that when Chinese are looking at Antony Blinken, saying, are you guys pranking us? Is this a prank?
You've summed it up. I can't believe that they don't think that, even if they don't come forward with it as an expression to Blinken. But I believe now they're probably coming forward with it as an expression to Blinken. In fact, I can't imagine that anything productive can come out of talks with the Chinese the way Tony Blinken has demonstrated that he is impervious to the truth. He's impervious to reality. He is, in a word, insane, as I would characterize the entire Biden administration. Now, I understand some of the insanity because it's a domestic political necessity, because they're so scared Donald Trump is going to beat them. And they believe that backing up on anything they've put forward forthrightly and with prestige invested in it, like Ukraine, like Gaza, they can't back up any, they can't mediate any, they can't even backtrack a centimeter. And so that breeds some insanity. But this is beyond the pale. I've never seen an administration in my 80 years on this earth, 50 years in the government in one way or another, as bad as this one.
If they're afraid of Donald Trump, I think the worst enemy of the Biden administration is the Biden administration because of their policy in Israel right now, in Gaza, because they're not helping themselves. And how they want to, if they're not helping themselves, how they would expect China to help them.
Exactly. And let's look at the other side too. Look at Mike Johnson up at Columbia University, a Schutzstaffel, an SS member standing there talking to those people on the campus, talking to the professors, talking to the administration, but most of all, talking to those very brave students. One of them was on YouTube yesterday. As I was coming back from Penn State, I got a chance to listen to her twice. Her name was Sarah King. She's a Jewish American student at Columbia. She was appalled that Mike Johnson was on the campus talking down to them the way he was talking, with, incidentally, she pointed out, the head of Proud Boys up there on the stand with him, and his Christian nationalism just eking out from every pore. And I wrote down some of the things that she said. She said, how dare he speak with Gavin McInnes up there? How dare he speak to us in the way he did? The worst discrimination against Jews on Columbia is them. This is a multi-generational coalition fighting racism, discrimination, and genocide. Do they not get it? These are brave kids. I shouldn't call them kids. These are brave men and women. They give me hope. They remind me of Vietnam, my day, when the protests swept the country, confined the president almost to his White House, and were so powerful that they aided and abetted us getting out of that terrible conflict in Vietnam after some 10 years. Only these youngsters don't have the sword of Damocles hanging over their head, the draft. They're just doing it because of their commitment to what she said, stopping genocide in Gaza, helping the Palestinians, feeding the Palestinians. They're brave kids. I'm all for them. I hope they sweep the country. I hope they sweep every campus in America.
Larry, how did you find the reaction to these movements? We saw that they arrested some professors at the campus.
Yes,
And
a horrible video with one of the economics professors on the ground being tussled into handcuffs. Unbelievable. But that's my state. I spent a lot of time in Georgia at Fort Benning in the Army. They have one of the most horrible statewide, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and city by city, not all of them, but many of them, horrible police force. All you have to do is go back and consult what they've done to blacks to understand how horrible their police forces are. So I'm not surprised by what happened there. I think it was at Emory, but shocked, especially with an economics professor doing that to her.
it's so amazing to see Speaker Johnson talking to two students at the university, because when he talks, you learn how detached from reality he is. Because
he reminded me of one of the brown shirts or black shirts, whatever, in the 30s in Germany. You will not do this. He also has the bearing, if you will, and the posture and the sort of holier than thou approach to other people that Christian nationalists have, which is what he is. He's one of these born again dudes who thinks Christianity should be the nation's religion. And don't you think for a moment that the Speaker of the House of Representatives of the United States doesn't believe that? He believes that in his soul. Jesus is king for Mike Johnson. So that's the way he speaks. That's the way these people are. If you don't believe the way I believe, then I'm going to get you. That's the way they operate. And now we've got one in the House as its leader.
do you think with the current situation at the universities, we know that this movement is getting momentum in the United States, in my opinion. And how do you see on the part of the government, on the part of the House, Senate, and the Biden administration, how they going to manage this?
Well, I don't know if you saw Netanyahu's speech. They probably called Bibi and asked him to give that speech. Not that he wasn't vile enough to already be ready to give it. Probably had it in his can ready to go, but they tweaked it a little bit for him. He gave that speech condemning us, condemning the United States of America for allowing this to happen and calling on our police forces to get out there and be Nazis, go after these people. That's how insane we are, Nima. I mean, we actually asked Bibi to do our job for us. And I'll tell you something else that's happening. I saw a little bit at UCLA, and you're going to see it at other campuses. AIPAC and others are stirring up some of the more hardcore Jewish students to start their own movement and counter the movement on campus. Well, the first thing you notice is how small the other movement is, but they're violent and they will attack these other students and they will get in your face. I've seen them. I've seen what they can do. They are vile, hateful people. They are true Zionists. And these kids are not anti-Semitic. Many of them are Jewish Americans, for God's sake. They are not anti-Semitic. They are anti-Zionist. They are anti-Netanyahu. They are anti-genocide. They are anti-starving Palestinians. They are anti-killing Palestinian babies with American bombs. That's what they're anti, and that's what burns Mike Johnson's heart, because he's for all that.
When it comes to Netanyahu and what he's trying to do is trying to force the US government to do in the United States. In your opinion, when we get to that point, that limit that the United States says to Netanyahu that no, that we're done with you, that's enough. You cannot go much further than that, because it's so amazing how he can manipulate everything in the United States.
Well, he's been building that up for 15 years with hundreds of millions of dollars behind it. And he's got a lot of allies in the United States, and a lot of them are dual citizens, and a lot of them should be in Israel as citizens over there or in the military doing what they should be doing if that's what they believe in. I cannot believe, if I were President Biden, I would pick up the phone and I would call Netanyahu and I would tell him, the next time you suppose yourself as my successor in the Oval Office and preach to the American people about what's right and wrong and what is security and what isn't security, I will cut everything off, including your private parts. I mean, I'd be that forceful with him. But Biden has no courage. He has no courage, partly because he's in love with Israel and partly because of politics, but also partly because he has no courage. And I have seen this in Joe Biden ever since he's been in the Senate. It shows itself every now and then, but it shows itself particularly with issues that don't necessarily have a political opportunistic angle to them. They're just moral issues, and Biden has a hard time with them. And when I say moral, I mean moral with a big M. I don't mean, whether or not you cheat on your wife. I mean whether or not you cheat on the United States of America. That's Biden's problem. And I frankly, I'll tell all my Democratic and Republican and independent friends right now, I am not going to vote for Joe Biden, period.
For those people who are not, as you mentioned, you are not going to vote Joe Biden. And there are many people out there, they're not willing to vote for Joe Biden nor for Donald Trump, because none of them are their choice. And what would be the solution in your opinion?
Get through this period and hope that these young people who are showing incredible courage and energy and dynamism all across America have it in their wherewithal to take this country over finally. And let's get rid of the geriatrics like Mitch McConnell and Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. Let's throw them on the garbage heap where they belong. Let's throw them into the dustbin of history, a polluted, corrupt history, to be sure, post 9/11 in particular. Let's throw them away. Let's start over again. Let's get a fresh writ. Let's elect some new, younger people, and let's restore the vibrancy and the decency and the humanitarianism of this republic. That's what these kids want to do. I keep calling them kids. I'm 80, they are kids, but they are young men and women with a purpose, and I support that purpose 100%.
Larry, these days we are watching these pictures of 1968 at Columbia University, and the people are doing the same right now in 2024. When you see these two pictures together, what's your impression of these two pictures?
Well, it brings back the images to me. At the time, I had just come back from Vietnam when the protests really reached their peaks in 69, I guess. And I was of real mixed emotions. I thought I'd gone to Vietnam to fight communists who wanted to, do the domino theory on Laos and Cambodia and the whole Southeastern Asian complex. I'd bought the line, hook, line, and sinker. But I came back and I listened to some of these people and I began to think, wow, are you the one that's wrong and they're right? Look at the power in these people. And as I said before, these people were motivated in part, at least, by the fact that they didn't want to be drafted for that stupid conflict. These youngsters out there today, they're not faced with a draft. They're just doing this out of pure conviction, courage, morality, ethics, and conviction. They know what's happening in Gaza is dead wrong. They know what the United States is doing in its relationship with Israel is vile. It's poisonous. They know, some of them, how bad the situation is in Ukraine, although there hasn't been a lot of talk about that. I don't think for a minute that these things wouldn't elide and merge eventually as Russia does more and more damage to NATO and NATO begins to fall apart. Have you seen what Macron has been talking about doing? I mean, he thinks he's a latter-day Charles de Gaulle. He's a latter-day Mickey Mouse is what he is. And Charles de Gaulle would never, never be doing what Macron is doing right now. But Macron seems to think that he is, he's going to follow in the footsteps of the great general. I'm sorry, you're not the great general. So this is macabre. It's farce. What Mark Twain said, tragedy is always followed by farce or whatever. That's what Macron is. But he is a symbol of what is going to happen to NATO in general eventually. And it's going to happen much faster the longer we persist in this support of Ukraine when it is clearly losing. We're going to have nothing but Kyiv and Zelensky left at the end of the day. Someone asked me earlier if I thought they would get rid of Zelensky. He's now not going to have the elections. I think they were on the 21st of May, but he put those off. In the past, what would have happened now is a coup. Someone would have risen up, they'd push him out or shoot him or whatever, or the Russians would take him on board, or we'd take him on board or whatever. He would flee the country and some new leader would come in and take over the corruption channels, because that's what Ukraine is a big state of corruption. It still is. Zelensky's done not much about that at all. The war precluded it pretty much and just deepened and enhanced the corruption. And our money to them has just made the corruption a cesspool. What are they going to do now? How are they going to get rid of this man who apparently won't do what he should do, which is a volte-face, a major change of face, accept the fact that he's lost and preserve as much of the state as he can in a reasonable peace settlement? Whatever you have to do that. And we should come right along and help him do that. We won't, and he won't. So where are we headed? Where are we headed? We're headed, if it stays out of the nuclear realm and out of a bigger and wider war, which is very dangerous, if it stays just what it is, he won't have anything but Kyiv and maybe even not that left when it's over. And Russia will be standing at the gates of NATO saying, well, Jesus, I'd like to give you this back because I don't really want it.
From what we've seen so far from Russia, from the behavior of Russia during this conflict, we don't see any sort of interest on part of Russia to take the western part of Ukraine. I think
no, they never have had any interest in that.
Because I don't know what the Biden administration is waiting for.
I think, if I were Putin for a day and I had this situation that I have right now, I'd probably march a few more kilometers. I'd be really, really significantly enticed into taking Odessa. I mean, that port, I would salivate over owning that port. I mean, I know his military does, especially his Navy. But that said, I would probably just stop, throw out some barriers and maybe some minefields and everything, and just say, okay, guys, I'm through. I've killed about half your population. I could kill the rest of you, but I don't want to, and I don't want the rest of your country. So I'm just going to stop right here. Screw you. When you get ready to talk, I'm in Moscow. I mean, just present us with a fait accompli like that. And oh, by the way, if you send any of those F-16s or those really dangerous missiles at me, I'll send 10 back at you. And I can outproduce you.
Larry, when you look at these new aid from the United States to Ukraine, it's not significant for the war that we're witnessing right now between Russia and Ukraine. And do you think they're trying to feed the Zelensky administration and these people who are working with them, these military elites, just to continue this war without having any sort of result in their minds?
Let's put it bluntly, they're bribing them to continue the war. That's what they're doing. They're bribing them to continue the war. And it's not a very big bribe, really. I'm not sure I would accept it if I were the other side, but they don't have a whole lot of choice caught between Russia on the one hand and NATO on the other hand. They're sort of in the meat cleaver, but it's a very luxuriant meat cleaver if you're not down there on the front lines.
Because we're hearing in in Poland and other European countries, they're talking about there are 100,000 military age Ukrainians that we can deport them and send them to Ukraine to die for nothing. And they're trying to do that right now. I don't know why they're doing this to these people who are not willing to fight. Why they put their lives in the front line for nothing.
It's ridiculous. If I were one of them, I probably would take my arms and ammunition, turn around and attack the people who'd given them to me. That's how furious I'd be about it.
Larry, the other thing that comes from this aid to Ukraine, and we've heard from Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer how they're so obsessed with China when it comes to the conflict in Ukraine. They said we are continuing this war in Ukraine because we don't want to send a bad message to China. And how much of this continuation of this war in Ukraine is connected to that mentality of that obsession with China?
That's one reason why I say we need to get rid of all these old people. We need to get rid of them. They're people who use historical analogies, metaphors, and such in such stupid ways. They can't get rid of Munich, for example. Oh, Munich is their stereotype. Oh my God, they'll compare Mickey Mouse walking across the street with Daisy with Munich. They like to resurrect these analogies from history, which are usually back there at least 75 years or further. And they say, oh, watch, that's what will be taught to China. That's what will be taught to Russia if we do this, if we do that. They have not come along with the world. Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell are still living in the years of the Cold War. They have no other mental template with which to think. Their history comes from there. Their analogies come from there. Their metaphors come from there. Their thought comes from there. They cannot break out of that. That's what's so powerful about these young people on the campuses all across the country. They not only have broken away from that, they were never imbued in it to break away from it. So they have a fresh thought process. They have a fresh look. And that's what astonishes people like McConnell and Schumer and Pelosi. Watch them when they're interviewed. Watch the clips on YouTube when they're interviewed or when they're speaking, and these people come on board and start shouting at them and showing their placards and everything. They don't know what to do except to do what Johnson did. Oh, bring in the security, get them out of here, so my quietude and my peace will come back, so I can tell you more lies and more lies. That's what they do. And we need to get rid of this crust, this old, ragged, aged crust that is contaminating our country. And the biggest aged crust is in the Oval Office. And I must add, apparently going to stand a few trials before he's ready to run for the presidency. Both of them, get rid of them. Let's have some young, energetic, dynamic, new thinking, not Cold War, young people in our military and in our political system, because our military leaders are just as bad.
Beside this conflict in Ukraine, we've heard that in Georgia, it seems that some sort of color revolution is going on and they're trying to do something. I don't know how stupid is that, and how, in your opinion, is that going to get the next step for this conflict between the United States and Russia?
Who knows? I mean, Putin's already demonstrated what he can do in Georgia. It's a much less tiresome battle for him there. He can be blitzkrieg-like there in a matter of 24 hours. He can have divisions in Tbilisi. So it's a very different military situation. I'm sure that they feel like, because this is part of the old Cold War feeling too. You know, we're being kicked out of Africa right now. Have you noted? You know, well, all along the Sahel, the governments are kicking us out. I think that's delightful. We should never have stood up African Command. We should never have militarized Africa. Colin Powell told everybody that when he was chairman of the Joint Chiefs. We do not need an Africa Command. That's the State Department's purview. It is economic assistance, it's aid, it's agriculture. That's what Africa needs, not bombs, bullets, and bayonets, damn it. But we did it anyway. And look what we did. We made a colossal mess of much of Africa. Now they're kicking us out for it. Thank God they're doing it. I'm not sure that the replacement's going to be any better, but it doesn't matter. It won't be our business, as it shouldn't be our business. Our business is economic. Our business is trade. Our business is helping Africa to stand up and do better, not killing people in the name of counterterrorism. Oh my God, what we've done in the name of counterterrorism. It was almost as bad under the days when we were anti-communists and we ripped and tore all through Africa trying to kill communists. This is even worse because the communists represented at least the Soviet Union, a power. These terrorists don't represent anything but themselves, and usually their grudge is in the country they're operating or the region they're operating. They don't have any bone to pick with the United States, but they will if we keep prodding them the way we're doing. I think I told you one time, a friend called me from Tunisia and he said, Larry, in every souk, in every bazaar, in every street, the 18, 19-year-old men in this country are talking about attacking the United States, all because of Gaza. So we are building some terrorists that are going to come and get us. I'm not sure we're not doing that on purpose too, because we realize Al-Qaeda isn't there anymore. And we got this authorization for the use of military force we still haven't gotten rid of. The Congress will not discard it. So we're still operating under that. And James Madison said the true nurse of executive power and aggrandizement is the war power. That's why we are still operating that way, because that makes the executive very powerful. You can do all kinds of things he can't do if he's not at war. We need to discard this whole generation. We need to get rid of them, and we need to do it post haste.
I think with the situation in Ukraine, we are at the final months of this conflict. They have to find some sort of negotiating table to get rid of this madness in Ukraine. And do you think that would be something like Afghanistan, what we've seen in Afghanistan, or would be something different?
I'd like to think that someone would wake up on the Ukrainian side and the NATO US side, and we would eat a little crow, perhaps, publicly as well as privately, and we go to Geneva or some other neutral ground, and we'd sit down and we'd work it out. I think it could be worked out, given the niceties of both sides, probably take a year or so. But in the meantime, we could have a negotiated ceasefire, freeze in place, and maybe some UN forces to make sure that it stays that way until we have a lasting peace agreement. But I don't see that coming anytime soon, because we are just simply the impediment. We being NATO, Washington, and particularly London. We are the impediments to this happening. Rishi Sunak needs to go too. I have never in my lifetime seen a British Prime Minister worse than Rishi Sunak. He's a disgrace to England. He's a disgrace to Britain. He's a disgrace to the British, what's left of the British Empire. And that's saying something. Britain has had some pretty bad prime ministers in the last 150, 200 years. So to say that he is disgusting, despicable, unethical, and a bum beyond any other British prime minister in my knowledge of their history is to say something.
The other thing would be the conflict between the United States and China. Right now in Philippines, we see some sort of movements, political movements against China. And do you think that Philippines and Japan would be something like Poland and Ukraine, as we saw in these two countries against Russia? We're gonna see Japan and Philippines together against China. Are we gonna see something like that?
I think they have more sense. I think their prime minister right now, he got a little bit of bump from coming to Washington and giving a speech that must have been written for him by Biden's speechwriters. But the Japanese are not stupid. And the Japanese see through that eventually, even if he did get a bump in the polls. I haven't seen the polls. I don't know if he got a bump or not, but that's the only reason he came, because he had the lowest poll ratings in a long, long time of any Japanese prime minister. So he wanted to bump in the polls. And usually a visit to the United States will get him one. I think they're smarter than that. I think the Koreans, I know the Koreans are smarter than that. I've spent half my life on the Korean Peninsula. And I know that others in the region, the Australians, are going to wake up as soon as they realize that French deal was a good deal. The American deal is a terrible deal. It'll never be fulfilled. The Australians will be whistling Dixie in the dark until their submarines arrive. The French submarines would have come almost immediately. They'd have been a lot cheaper. They would have done everything the Australians needed them to do. They would not have been a significant threat to China, but they would have given Australia some warm feelings about their ability to protect the oceans around them. That's all they needed. We talked them out of that. I think a new Australian government will probably cancel that deal with us. I hope they do. I hope they're smart enough to. First of all, as I said, they'll never see it. They'll never see the submarines. And if they do see them, they won't be what they were promised. So the whole region is going to wake up later than Europe, because Europe has got Ukraine to begin the process of waking it up. You know, we can regale Macron for his stupidity, but at the same time, I recognize that what he's doing is starting the wake up. And what we need is a singular, important, significant, looking to the future European security identity, divorced from Washington, D.C. This is not Donald Trump and isolationism. I hate that term. I don't think isolationism describes any political philosophy that the U.S. has ever had. You could call it circumspection. You could call it prudence at a time of peril. Call it anything you want to that's positive and addresses what it really is. It is not isolationism. Europe needs to stand up and be responsible for its own defense of its $740 million, $23 trillion state, which it can't get its political act together and wrap around, but nonetheless, it needs its own security identity. And these kind of movements by Macron and what is going to happen in Germany when they get a new chancellor and other places are going to start that. And that means, fear in Washington, because it means the evaporation of our powerful economic hegemony over Europe and more competitiveness. And that's what we say we want, but we're liars. We've always been liars. We don't want free trade, and we don't want competitiveness. We want America to dominate and America to make more money. That's what we want. I was there. I talk with the Undersecretary for Economic Affairs. I talk with the people who were for free trade. Free trade my ass. Free trade for America, as Putin and Xi Jinping and every other leader in the world have finally figured out. Free trade for America is we step on you and you pay us for it.
Before Antony Blinken visiting China, we know that Janet Yellen, and after that, Olaf Scholz went to China. And do you think this sequence of standing?
I know you didn't mean it that way, but that's quite a combination.
Yeah.
I think if I were the Chinese, I would have said, I surrender.
Exactly. Do you think this sequence of sending Janet Yellen and after that Olaf Scholz, right now Antony Blinken, has some sort of meaning for Washington? Is there any sort of agenda? Is there any sort of they were dividing this duty in three parts by Janet Yellen and Olaf Scholz, right now Antony Blinken, to convince China?
I can only imagine. Now, I'm not an economist, but I can only imagine that one of the major discussion items Janet took with her was, please keep buying our debt. And I can only imagine that one of the things the German chancellor took with him was, don't pay any attention to the Americans. We're still going to deal with you. I mean, I really believe that was probably part of both of their messages. Please keep buying our debt. Don't discard it so fast that it really makes us hurt. And for the German, I'm going to deal with you.
And before Olaf Scholz, we had Angela Merkel in Germany. You know that she had some advantages, some disadvantages, but she was totally different from what we've seen so far from Olaf Scholz. It's so unbelievably different from Angela Merkel. She was much more powerful, much more present in everything that was happening in those days. Right now, Olaf Scholz is so unbelievably passive when it comes to this interaction, these political interactions between the United States, Germany, Russia. How Germany got to this point?
Well, if you look at Helmut Kohl and then you look at Angela Merkel, they were two pretty really long-serving, as they should have been probably, and very powerful, understanding, competent German chancellors. To get three would have been a miracle, probably. I don't think, like us, I don't think they had been grooming anyone, especially in that particular compilation of powers in Germany, it being so different from us. And so they got what they got. And I'm really interested in what they're going to get next, because I don't think he's very long for the world. And I'm concerned about what they get next. I see the Alternative for Germany party growing and growing and growing, and I'm seeing Marie Le Pen's party in France, as it has had the want to do in the past, smelling the winds very carefully and shifting and shaping and getting to the point where they and Alternative for Germany maybe might be in some sort of tacit alliance and would work that to do what I was talking about before in terms of a European security identity that's isolated from Washington. And maybe that's the right term, isolated. I don't mean it to be isolated. I mean in conjunction with the United States, not in any formal alliance, but they've got one, we got one, so to speak. I could see that being, we got one and to hell with you. That's not a very good development, I don't think. I think we still need to be in a transatlantic link of sorts, economic, financial, customs, beliefs, ideals, democracy, and so forth. But at the same time, we need to be more separate than we've been for the last 75 years in terms of security. And this could be a real monkey wrench in that if we let this get out of hand. And what's happening is they're taking power and juice from the situation right now, and alienated voters. They're getting those voters. And that's democracy. You make big mistakes, and suddenly you turn around and you've lost power, and somebody else has gained it, and that somebody else is not always the best.
The third country receiving this aid from the United States is Israel. And when it comes to this aid to Israel, do you think the Biden administration was trying to bribe the Netanyahu administration not to attack Rafah, or they were just helping them and not considering anything of this nature of this attack on Rafah?
I think they were hoping that, I really do think that they were hoping that he wouldn't make a final attack on Rafah, and that their protestations thereto would be public and on the surface, so it would help Biden in the elections. I think Netanyahu has, for the most part, rebuffed them, and it remains to be seen that he is going to do this in a vicious way, which he has done to this point. But I think he's going to do it. Maybe attenuated somewhat, but attenuated probably because he doesn't have the forces to do it anymore. And so he's going to adapt necessity to dreams. And his dreams were, eradicate them, Ben Gvir, go start your settlement process. I don't think he's going to take it that far. I don't think he's going to be able to. And I think his dreams of bringing the United States into a war with Iran were more or less in a wonderful game of chess, if you discount the possibility of deaths, and some real deaths, in the Israeli strike on the Iranian consulate in Syria. aside from that, it was a wonderful display of chess, and the Iranians won, and so did everybody else. And the U.S. and all its fighter pilots and its massive airplanes and its shoot down of all the missiles and everything else lost. So the Iranians are sitting there right now, having demonstrated to Netanyahu that they could do some real significant damage to Israel, and almost overnight. And oh, by the way, we haven't even unleashed Hezbollah. So Netanyahu's dream to get the United States into war against Iran and war against Hezbollah, both at the same time, meaning Iran, really, I think has evaporated. It doesn't mean he's not going to try a couple more times, maybe with a direct attack on Hezbollah that will have to be responded to. But I think he's been sobered a bit about that. And he's been sobered by the Iranians as much as he has by Joe Biden and the lectures that I'm told that he's gotten from Biden about, we are not going to kill Iran for you under any circumstances, dude. So forget about it. So this is a very convoluted picture right now, but it's calmed a bit. And the big question is the one you just asked. What is he going to do to perturb it again? Majorly, perhaps, but maybe not so majorly in Rafah. And how's he going to close this out? Because he has not accomplished his objectives. He, of course, will say he has. Watching his speech today, when he was speaking as the president of the United States to American youth and to American law enforcement, I mean, you understand how desperate the man is, desperate to get his way. And yet the pain in his eyes is coming through. He hasn't gotten his way. And he knows he's facing the end of the road. And that end of the road is prison and out of power. And he's still alive. He hasn't died. And that's not a pleasing prospect to him. So I have no idea what at the last minute, like a madman, he might do. I hope we've put enough security locks, as it were, in place around him, as we did, for example, in the first Gulf War, where we essentially told the prime minister, you shoot a single missile at Saddam Hussein's forces and we will crush you. I mean, that's what H.W. Bush told them. And they didn't. They took several hits from Saddam Hussein's Scud missiles, and they didn't respond. They believed us. H.W. was a tough negotiator. Biden's not. So I don't know how tough he has been. We still might see some bad stuff from Gaza.
When we look at Gaza and the situation that has been going on for more than 6 months, and we see by each day passing, Israel is not gaining but losing in everything.
Yes.
Because they couldn't do anything against Hamas, that they're talking all the time, they're talking about Hamas, but they did nothing when it comes to Hamas.
And they haven't gotten the hostages back.
Exactly.
And now we know I was becoming doubtful of this, but I think my information is accurate now, that there are some of them still alive, maybe several, maybe a few, maybe even more than 25 or 30. So what have you succeeded at, Bibi, other than rubbling an entire stretch of land and killing 33, 34, 35,000 people, many of whom are children and women? What have you succeeded at?
And beside that, we're going to have this political defeat on the part of the Netanyahu and his administration. Because he was, before all this madness starting, we had this path of new relationship with Turkey, with Saudi Arabia, with all of these countries. Right now, all of that is gone. And everybody all around the world is recognizing Netanyahu and his administration as the worst administration on the earth, on the face of earth. And I don't know do they really understand what's the situation that they're in right now?
Does Netanyahu understand? I think it's your question, because I don't think Likud and I changed my mind about this about a week ago. I don't think Likud has a coalition of bravery, I guess I'd call it, a coalition of sanity within its midst that can oust him. And so I think they've made this commitment. I brought up the allusion to Masada. You know, they're all up there and they commit suicide while the Roman legion is down at the foothill. I think they made this pact that they're not going to commit suicide. I hope not. Maybe I don't hope not. That'd save the world a lot of pain. But I think they're together to the bitter end. I may be wrong. I hope I am. I hope tomorrow morning I wake up and Benny Gantz has thrown Netanyahu in jail and, has held emergency elections and got 99% of the vote and he's the new prime minister. He'd probably do the same thing, but he won't do it quite as nastily and he won't do it without the blessing of the United States really and formally. And I think that would be a much weaker, if even an attack on Rafah. So, I mean, anything can happen. I've learned that from my time in government. Powell used to say, the crisis, Larry, that you're going to have to confront is the one you had no idea was coming an hour before it comes. And there's a lot of truth to that. There's a lot of truth to that. Plan, wake up in the morning and your plans are out the window because this happened. But this has to be a stop to this. It just has to be. We can't go on in this way. For Netanyahu to attack Rafah and bring into Rafah the same tactics he brought into Khan Yunis, for example, or elsewhere in Gaza, would be, in my view, a catastrophe. I think it would cost Biden the election.
Larry, I think this attack on Iranian consulate, then the response from Iran to what Israel did in Syria was a crucial point for Israel and their strategy, because they know right now that how the situation can get worse if they go on and on with these conflicts. And if anything, because we saw that Joe Biden said to them that they're not willing to help them if they wanted to respond to Iran. And it seems it was an important point for Israelis to understand at the end of the day, they have to get along with these countries.
I think the philosophy of Bibi Netanyahu is to hell with that. I don't have to get along with anyone except Big Daddy. And I own Big Daddy. If you don't think I own Big Daddy, look at what the speaker did at Columbia University. I own Mike Johnson. And there's some truth to that. There's some truth to that. But I think it's unraveling. I think slowly but surely. And I think one of the major elements pulling those threads and unraveling it are these brave, courageous young people all across America on campuses.
I think this would be a very good point that you mentioned about these students, these courageous young men and women that are doing greatly in the United States to oppose this policy that we're witnessing in Gaza and what Netanyahu is doing. And I hope they can get somewhere good with this policy and they can find some sort of solution, and they would force these politicians to get out of these disastrous policies in Gaza. And thank you so much, Larry, for being with us today. Great pleasure as always.
Thank you for having me.